So hello everyone and welcome to week 2 of From Linear to Circular Open to All webinar series. And today we will be speaking about design. And my name is Ilma and I'm part of the learning team and I will be your co-host today.
Hey, and if you don't remember me from the last webinar, my name is Seb. I'm also part of the learning team and I'll be hosting alongside Ilma. Today's webinar is about design for the circular economy. So we did a bit of a getting everyone up to speed, thinking about the kind of what we mean and which circular economy we're talking about. This week, we're diving into the mindset, strategies, and perhaps why many of us are designers without even realizing it. So there'll be some interactivity. There's another red pen for some to get your views on some things, involve you in some circular design thinking. And of course, we'll be interweaving your questions throughout as much as possible.
Yes, but before we go into the design, let's look at the last week's homework. So we asked you to do two things. The first thing was to form a learning trio in order to reflect on your learning journey. And we hope that you managed to do that. And it's okay if you're in learning couples or if your group is larger than 3, if it's 4 or 5, that's totally fine. And the reason why we want you to do the learning trios is to help you facilitate your learning throughout the entire program. And we will get back to the learning trios at the end of this webinar. And the second thing we asked you to do for your homework was to watch a short video called A Good Disruption, and then post your Giphy with your key insight or inspiration from this video onto our Slack channel. And there was a huge variety of Giphies that we watched and saw, and the topics ranged from togetherness to let's get started to overwhelmment with a task ahead. And me and
I think the task really demonstrated the value of Giphy as a concept because of the diversity of stuff that we were able to see.
Yes, and we do have a few favorite ones, and I'm just gonna share my screen and show you what we have picked. Here we go. So, Seb, which ones are your favorite ones?
Some of the ones I picked up, the Lion King one in the top right corner, change is good, yeah, but it's not easy. One of the things I always think about with when we talk about circular economy is often we say, right, it's about changing the whole system. It's, you know, this huge change for all of society. And then quite often people are like, well, why is it not happening yet? Or how do we do it? And of course, that's, you know, a challenging question. And one of the things that we're exploring more deeply throughout this series. Who doesn't love Lion King as well? You know, in the chat, I want to know if you don't love Lion King.
One of the other ones that I picked was that the fact that you must learn what you have learned, the one with Yoda. I think we're going with some, you know, really popular characters from the popular culture. But I think a lot of things that we take a lot of things for granted in the linear economy, and we kind of learned and didn't question them. And I think we need to re-examine and question a lot of things when we go forward. So for me, this quote seemed to be very apt.
Someone says, Ariel says that Lion King is my favorite movie ever. Well, Graham says that he doesn't like Lion King. So Graham, we'll be talking on Slack later. But yeah, there's some great, it's great ones. I also selected the one about changing the narrative. And I think that was a key theme for us in the first session is it's about the story and it's about how we frame things. It's really important.
Yes, and I think that one appeared more than once. And I think my absolute favorite, probably also given the fact that today is the Earth Day, is the middle one. The world needs a big hug. And given the physical distancing, I think we all need a big hug at this moment. But yeah, that was my favorite.
Lovely. So fantastic to see such engagement. Hopefully it started off some conversations as well amongst yourselves in the channel. Great feedback on A Good Disruption as well. So yeah, thank you for being such eager participants. So that does lead me to, you know, I always said I wouldn't be one of these people who talked about the rules of different forums and chat channels, but it turns out that it is quite important. So we are going to talk about some house rules in terms of how we use some of the channels we're using on this program. And we really thank, I mean, it's been fantastic to see how it's all exploded and how many people are posting, engaging. Also, how many people are try to help and are saying how can we organize it to maximize the value. So everyone who's reached out and said, could you do this or that, we really appreciate it. We know that there's going to be some chaos and we expect it to settle down, but a few things that maybe could be helpful. So recorded sessions, all the recorded sessions. So we'll share the link to Slack as well in the chat, and continue to share that as well a couple of times in the session for anyone who isn't on Slack yet. Recorded sessions are on a channel called #recorded sessions. So search for recorded sessions in the channel list, and that's where all the content will be. Please don't post anything yourself in that channel. And it's also made available on our LinkedIn, on the from Linear Circular Open To All LinkedIn. We also, there's also a channel called Get Info, where you can find out all the channels that the foundation is set up and what they're kind of for. You can find all the homework detail on a channel called Homework Plus Materials. So that's the channel to join. And I think we've only got about 250 people so far joined in that channel. So for those of you asking what the homework is, if you've forgotten, or just want to be refreshed about what some of the prompts we gave are, go to that channel. General is for general CE stuff, and the weekly channels are for each discussion that relates to each week's topic or session. So the idea is that we carry on the conversation or start the conversation in those channels. If you're responding to someone, there's a little tool on Slack that allows you to actually click respond, so that it's not just another message, but actually threads the conversation, which is really good for going backward and forward. And I've had a couple of those already this week, which has been fantastic. And you can mute individual channels as well as the whole of Slack if you don't want to get peppered by the notifications. If any of you have been shocked by the number of notifications you're getting. So that's Slack. Hopefully that's clear. And I think we'll probably share these house rules somewhere in Slack as well, if they've not already, perhaps they've already been shared actually. Questions about Zoom. The link to register is a personal link, and you can find this in your confirmation email. So make sure you download the event to your virtual invite, and you'll receive the reminders via email. We have had a couple of questions specifically about the webinars where there's multiple choices, and they are happening at the same time, and you have to choose one. Although if you wanted to join either the cities or food webinars, those are now full. So your option now left are plastics and fashion on those 2 weeks. And we are working obviously with IT to solve glitches that people encounter, and we try to get back to you on an individual basis. I would say, there are over 5,000 people enrolled on the program. So if you're emailing us, that does make it hard for us to reply really quickly. So do check the Slack and have a little forage around the Slack and LinkedIn, because many of the answers will be answers to commonly asked questions. That's my admin.
And 2 more admin pieces before we introduce Joe. So just about today's webinar. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your menu, and please use Q&A for the questions. If you have a question in relation to this webinar, and we ask to only ask questions in relation to this webinar, whether logistics or content, you can put it in Q&A. Chat is for you to comment, discuss, have interactions with each other. But if you want the question to be asked by one of the EMF staff who are busy there behind the scenes trying to pick up all the questions, put it in Q&A and make sure that it relates to today's webinar.
We learned last time that trying to keep up in the chat was impossible, so we're taking advantage of this really cool Q&A function. So now, without any further ado, we're talking about design for circular economy today, and the guest speaker we're joined by is Joe Isles, who is the Circular Design Program Lead at the Foundation. And he's held a number of different roles at the Foundation throughout time. He's especially heavily involved in our editorial team in our Circulate News channel for a while. I've worked with Joe for now over 6 years, and I think he's one of the best people that I've had conversations about circular economy in terms of merging the concept with the practical application of it, which is what's going. So I really encourage you to use this time with him as wisely as you can.
Welcome, Joe.
Well, thank you, Seb. That was very kind. I think that's one of the kindest words that you've ever said about me, and in front of so many people. Thank you. You really saved that. And thank you to everyone for joining this session today to hear more about circular design. And I hope wherever you are, you're happy and healthy, considering the global situation.
Joe, before we
Yeah,
venture into your
sure.
monologue and slides, could you tell us a bit more about your interest and passion and expertise in circular design and how that developed?
Yeah, sure. So so I think it does stem from what Seb just said, that I've been working at the foundation for around 9 years now, and I'm really passionate about the topic of a circular economy. I'm not a designer myself, but I've always been interested in how this theory or concept is being translated to things that you could interact with, whether they're products or services, and things that you could touch or feel. So I've always been interested in that. And then I had the fortune of working really closely with IDEO as we created the circular design guide at the foundation, which I'll mention a bit more about a bit later on. So I've kind of been close to the topic, and then more recently have been lucky enough to work on this circular design program, trying to work with many more people who are implementing the principles of a circular economy in products, services, and systems.
Great. So the stage is yours.
Thanks, Ilma. Well, I think I wanted to set a few expectations as we start, expectations for the conversation today. And you may be surprised, hopefully not too disappointed, to hear that I'm not actually going to try and tell you what circular design is during this webinar, not in terms of a concise definition or a checklist or how-to guide, at least. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully the viewing numbers aren't going to plummet, guys. Sorry if that's the case. But I think there is a good reason behind that, and I have thought about it. Instead, what I'm hoping to do today is to tell you why I believe that design is really important for the shift to a circular economy. And I'll certainly be talking about some of the main concepts, so the principles that are involved, the approach broadly. And we're definitely going to take a look at some of the people or the companies who are showcasing circular design in action, good examples of circular design. And you all kind of did the work for me there with the responses to the Monday question, and I really appreciated that. And from there, my hope is that actually it's you who will really find out what circular design is and what it means for you, what it means for your own learning, your work, your life, and whatever it is that you want to achieve with this learning journey around the circular economy. Because I really believe the best way to get to grips with this topic, beyond the first understanding around the circular economy generally, is to actually do it for yourself. And if at this stage you're thinking, well, I'm not a designer, I don't live in a design studio, or I don't have access to the resources to do circular design, well, I would just say in many ways, the best way to get started with this whole topic is simply by exploring new ways of thinking and using just what's in your head. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later on. I'm just going to put some images up on screen now. I'm going to try and avoid sharing too many slides today, but this one is a nice image. I've been curating a DIY photo series. I'm not a photographer, like in the same way I'm not a designer. But when I go on a walk with my dog in the morning, I take photos of some of the weird and wonderful things that people leave on the streets around where I live, which actually probably tells you more about the type of place I live in, to be honest. This is one of my favorites, a mound of stuff that was left on a street corner. And my favorite piece is the Henry the Hoover, an iconic domestic appliance, a vacuum cleaner, smiling at us from amongst the rubbish there. And as you can see from the packaging that he came in on the left-hand side, that's a product that the manufacturer said was built to last, but is kind of lasted about as long as the packaging that it came in, which there's something to be said there about the way we interact with products and stuff. Something to muse on as we go forward.
He's still got a smile on his face, though.
He has, although I think it's quite thinly veiled. I think it's masking some deep pain. So what makes a solution more or less appropriate for a circular economy? I think that it comes down to the many decisions that influence the production, the use, and what happens after use. And those decisions happen upstream. I don't know if this word has been mentioned a few times already in the course, but it's something that we talk about a lot at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We talk about these upstream decisions. But another way to phrase it is thinking about the design stage, the stage at which decisions are made, which makes something more circular or more linear. The decisions that decide whether something stays in the economy providing value, or whether it ends up in the ocean, in the environment, in an incinerator, or stuck in the back of someone's wardrobe being unused. And for some products, that design stage is pretty obvious. For something like a smartphone from a slick Californian manufacturer, for a piece of furniture or for a designer dress, I mean, the clue's even in the name for that one. The design stage for those things is pretty obvious, but for other things, it's a bit less clear, and we may not even think of some items as being designed. Something like a ham sandwich, is that designed? Or a bus network, or a marketplace, or a supermarket. But people are still making decisions at some point about how those things work as well. And in that way, if you think about it, everything has a design stage. And it follows, for me at least, that this design stage and changing the way we think and approach this design stage is really crucial in shifting towards a more circular economy. And apologies if this sounds a bit simple or basic, or you're a few steps ahead of me, but I just want to be really clear to illustrate the link between design and the circular economy. And that link for me is that the circular economy demands a fundamentally different approach to the design stage of all the products, services, and systems around us. And at its heart, this different approach has those three principles of a circular economy, which you've no doubt come across already: design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. So when we talk about circular design, and this might be as close as I get to a definition, we're really just talking about design for a circular economy. And it's an approach that hopefully generates solutions that are increasingly circular, rather than linear. And another really important thing about this is that it's not just about designers in the traditional sense, about products alone, or about the aesthetics of those products. It's not just about people with design in their job title, although they're super important and often have some agency and the skill set to make different decisions at that design stage. But it's much broader than that. And we did some research a couple of years ago at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we estimated that there are around 160 million people globally that make decisions that can influence materials flows. That's about 5% of the workforce that can influence whether products, services, and systems are becoming more linear or more circular or more linear. They both work. I just can't get my words right. So if someone makes decisions about the way that can impact the way we make and use products and materials, then they absolutely play a role in the design stage. And I believe that a circular economy is a massive opportunity for them. And circular design is a new approach that's relevant for them. And for me, that's what circular design means. So just by way of summary, design is really crucial in the shift to a circular economy. Everything has been designed by someone, whether it's the clothes that we wear, the buildings we live in, systems that deliver us food and mobility. Throughout this process, design decisions influence whether a product stays in the economy or is lost. And those decisions set in motion how that product's made, how it's used, and if it ends up remaining in the economy providing value, or whether it's lost in the ocean, in the environment, or sits idle. And to quote one of the friends of the foundation, Alicia Garmalevich, who quipped once that you can't unscramble an omelette. These design decisions are often really difficult to reverse, which is why that design stage is just so important. So at this stage, you're probably thinking, okay, how do I actually do it? Get on with it, Joe. How do I practice circular design? And if you are saying that, then I think I've done an okay job so far. You're on board. You're on my side. And I really think the best place to start practicing circular design is by understanding that it's a mindset, a new mindset, and a set of strategies. If you can really get your head around the mindset and set of strategies for circular design, then you're on the right track with coming up with solutions that are fit for a circular economy. Firstly, I'm going to talk a bit about the mindset. And here we talk about zooming in and zooming out. This is material that you can find more information on the Circular Design Guide if you haven't seen this already. I'll just give a quick summary now. For the zooming in stage, this is what the designers on the call or the design community might call user-centered design. So about asking the question of how a product or a service really meets the needs of the user. And typically, in the past few decades, we've got pretty good at this. Whether you're a designer or not, hopefully you can see that many of the things you surround yourselves with in your home or in your office are kind of designed to meet your needs. Some of them do it better than others, for sure. And we've all had experience of products that you might say, that was really well designed. But you can usually see that the focus has been on you as the end user and satisfying your needs in a particular moment or at a particular time. So this bit, I think, is fairly well understood. The real addition, and it's, on some levels it's quite simplistic, but the real addition for circular design is zooming out to look at the whole system. And this is really, really important. To zoom out is to understand that the user, that user we spoke about before, really belongs to a wider system in which everything is connected, and they interact with other parts of that system over time. And the materials, the products that they use, they're all connected as well. So zooming out might be about asking what happens to products once they've been used, where did the materials come from, who's involved in the provision of the service, what flows of materials, of energy, of information are passing through different people's hands as those users' needs are met. Are there other people beyond that end user that are important in that system? Maybe a second or third user of a particular product, or perhaps someone who takes care of a product when no one wants it anymore. They're kind of in scope as well once you start to zoom out and look at the whole system. And then it encourages you to ask the question, are you designing for them as well? Are you considering the different nodes of this system beyond just that end user, in which many design practices have kind of ended there? That's been the culmination of the design process, thinking about that end user. So zooming out is about getting a bird's eye view of the wider system and all the implications. So that's the mindset. It sounds kind of simple, zooming in and zooming out, but it really is a truly powerful way of getting started with thinking about circular design and looking for opportunities to shift systems from being linear to more circular. And we're going to ask you to practice this at the end of the session. It kind of feeds into the homework piece as well. So you will be given a chance to try this out a bit later on. In parallel to this mindset shift, also there's the circular design will lead you to a number of different strategies for inventing solutions that are fit within the circular economy framework. And I'm not going to give you a list of these. And another really important thing to understand is that circular design is not a dogma or a checklist for coming up with circular products. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it. It's pretty clear that the strategy that you might employ for a food product will be very different to one that you would apply for packaging, for a building, for a transport system, and other types of products. Even within a specific category like packaging, which is a hot topic for many, of course, that it's not just about one solution or one magic bullet. Think about something like durability. There might be some reusable packaging that you'd want to last for a long time, and then others that you may want to disappear once it's being finished used and not cause a lasting waste problem or materials problem. So the principles of a circular economy will lead you to a range of design strategies. Some of those you can see on the screen now, like material selection, dematerialization, extending the life of a product, so that durability piece.
Could you say a word about dematerialization, Joe? Just someone asked about it.
Yeah, sure. So you could think about, I mean, it's not necessarily a perfect circular economy example, but something like Spotify is one that springs to mind for me, that we used to, in fact, in my loft here in the corner, I have a box of old CDs, materials, that used to be my music collection. Now, for me at least, that has been dematerialized. I'm fully aware that there's a server somewhere that needs to be powered and has high quality materials in those servers that make sure that I can access Spotify when I want it and access that service that has been virtualized for me. But it is interesting to think about which services could be provided in a similar way, in which you don't need to necessarily own the materials themselves, but you could access the service. Another way to think about it is people mention the iPhone or a smartphone when they talk about dematerialization, rather than having a calculator, a camera, a video camera, a calendar. You could have it in one device. Yes, again, there are implications of that. It's a device that has many different types of materials in it, and we need to be thinking about what happens to that next. But I think that just speaks to the point that there isn't just one solution that you can apply for coming up with more circular products and services.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another ask for explanation for design
Sure.
for inner loops.
Design for inner loops, yeah, sure. Well, hopefully you guys looked at the butterfly diagram.
We looked at the butterfly diagram last week, and I explained the technical side loops.
Yeah, so designing for inner loops is where we think about especially on that technical side of the butterfly diagram, those inner loops. And the real breakthrough for me after I'd been at the foundation for probably more time than I want to admit, was when someone described those inner loops in the following way, that we often hear about people taking a product and being very proud that they've stripped it back to its raw materials so that they can make a new product. And charitably, that is a good starting point, or often that is the first step for a business that's entering into more circular practices, into loops at all. But if you think about it, when you do that, you're stripping away all the value that you added to those materials to turn them into a product in the first place. All the energy and labor that went into turning those materials into, let's say, a laptop or a pair of headphones, you're stripping that back and you have to add it again. So that's why we say that when you're looking at the butterfly diagram, that it's those inner loops where there's most value, where if you can preserve the integrity and the value of the product, then that's a greater opportunity. Hopefully that's clarified, Ilma.
Thank you.
So many of these approaches you can find out more about on the Circular Design Guide. Again, we're going to dip into something on materials in just a few minutes, and you may have had a kind of peek of that through the red pen earlier on. I'm going to move on now to talk a bit about the some of the case examples. Ilma, did you want to stop for any more questions, or shall I carry on?
I think we could carry on to example.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Will arise.
Yeah, fine. So I mentioned earlier that a great way to learn about circular design is to actually do it at some level, whether that's just the thought processes or the approach. But another great way is to see who's doing it and who's doing it well. And you helped me no end on this earlier on in the week in response to the Monday question. I went through the 100-odd examples of circular design that you submitted on Slack, and I picked out a handful that I really liked. And for the purposes of this conversation, I've separated them into the pace of use, and that's really not the best way to say that. But how long the product needs to last, or how long the service needs to be provided for. It'll become a bit clearer when I show you. So Firstly, the first three that I picked out are really around packaging. That wasn't necessarily a conscious choice, but I guess it relates to these what we call fast-moving consumer goods, things that you might need for you need them to provide a service for a short amount of time before they're ultimately disposed of. As we know, this category and this type of product results in many of the waste problems that are really high profile in the news or visible in the environment on a daily basis for many of us. Things like plastic packaging and so on. The three that I really liked from the ones you suggested are on the screen now. I'll take Loop first because so many of you suggested Loop as one of your favorite examples of circular design. It's one that I absolutely love as well. Some people mentioned the milk bottle being one of their favorite examples. It's a really good example, of course, but I think what I like about Loop is that it's really updated for the new context and seems to be a business model that is finding some traction in today's market. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Loop are partnering with major food and fast-moving consumer goods brands to offer products in reusable packaging. And the Haagen-Dazs one has been admired around the world because it's kind of beautiful. Rather than that cardboard cup, which ice cream usually comes in, that kind of goes a bit soggy and is a bit grim, this aluminium reusable container actually keeps the ice cream at a much better temperature for consuming on a hot summer's day. So the great thing about that is not only is it reusable and can be used again and again, and there's a business model to support that, but it actually does a better job as well, which is something that we always look out for with good examples of circular design. That one also very clearly emphasizes the principle of keeping products and materials in use. On the left is the soap bottle. I wasn't aware of this one. I thought it was super cool. It reminded me of another one that we are a bit more familiar with at the foundation, not PLA, these edible water blobs in which the packaging just disappears. It's not, you never get to a point where there's a waste problem because the packaging only lasts as long as the product you need it for. And this soap bottle is a bottle of shampoo in which the bottle is made of soap. So the bottle is designed to last as long as the contents, at which point it can just be used like a bar of soap. I thought that was really cool. Yeah, Elma?
Well, the cup club that you're probably about to speak about it. I was just thinking about it generally because Keep Cup was mentioned as well, and there are so many different options of alternative reusable cups.
Sure.
And I was thinking, is it enough to just, replace the single-use item with a reusable item, or should we be more critical of which reusable items we choose as well?
I think we do need to think critically about it. I mean, if you think about an aluminium or stainless steel water bottle, which was also mentioned, they're great, and I have one, but I've also lost two of them. And if I think about the material and energy use that went into making three stainless steel bottles, I haven't done the calculation, but I imagine you could have used quite a few plastic bottles for the same bill. But then that's just comparing the energy and materials. What about the fact that lots of plastic bottles end up in the environment or aren't recycled, and there are other implications there. So again, it encourages you to think systemically and say it's not just a simple swap in, swap out solution. I think the reason I mentioned Cup Club is that they aim to take reusables to scale by offering a business model that works in more reliably, I think. So we've all probably could admit to the moments where we really want a coffee, but we've forgotten our reusable cup. Or you probably walk down the street with your reusable cup feeling pretty smug, but see 100 people that don't feel that way, and they chose the single-use one because it was easier and they didn't want to buy the 20 quid Keep Cup or whatever. So I think that's the interesting thing there. Yes, it's great that many people have chosen reusables out of their own desire, or their want desire to do good and use less single use. But what about what about everyone else? How can you put in place a business model that makes this the norm rather than just for the people that can afford to or want to take part?
You've created a bit of a storm, Joe, in the chat about
Uh-oh.
Spotify. So it'd be good to check in on that later.
Yeah, do you want to do it now, Seb, or later?
I think it's more about Spotify as an organization. So let's take that one to Slack. But there was a question asking a clarification about Loop, in how does Loop keep packaging in use? Have they designed how this aluminium packaging is collected, clean, etc.? So I guess that reinforcing that point.
Yeah, I mean, I won't spend too long kind of talking about the ins and outs of it, probably because of time, and also that what you find out online will be way better versed than me. But yeah, it arrives in a zipper kind of tote bag. You send them back. I think that's everyone's thought, right? How do they streamline that reverse loop piece? Because we all know it's really easy to get products in our homes. If you've ordered off Amazon, you know just how quick and reliable that is. The difficult bit is getting it back. So that's the piece I think they've worked really hard on. I'd encourage you to go and check it out. But from what it seems to me is that there's as much attention paid to that as the containers themselves. Just moving to things that are designed to last a bit longer. 3 of my favorites that were mentioned in the Monday question thread were Gerrard Street, the headphones as a service, which is a great example. We featured them at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's summit last year. The idea is that you pay for a few euros a month. You subscribe to high-end headphones that would maybe be 150 or 200 euros if you bought them outright. They're designed to be modular, so if one of the parts breaks, that you get sent a replacement part. You don't have to chuck out the whole thing. And again, this is down to the design of the product itself and the business model that supports it. And I think Doris, who is one of the founders of Gerrard Street, said that I think they had some experience in the music industry or were just avid music fans. Maybe they use Spotify. But they noticed that the same piece kept breaking on their headphones. It was the piece where the cable meets the earpiece. So they've made that modular, simple design tweaks in working in concert with a business model for providing reliable and good quality headphones on an ongoing basis. I think the other interesting thing with that is some products that are made to last, and you hear this quite a lot, that we should all be encouraged to buy products that are made to last or that are repairable. Sometimes those things are really expensive. So it might be all right if you can afford them, but for many people, they wouldn't be able to. So they might have to buy the cheaper version out of necessity. It's interesting to think whether you can offset that initial cost and give more people access to higher quality products, high quality repairable or remanufacturable products by offering them on a subscription basis. So business model, again, super important. The same thinking can be applied to Circos. I wasn't super familiar with this one. It's a subscription model for baby clothes. Thanks to whoever submitted this. We know probably a competitor pretty well, Vigga Svensson from Sweden, who offers, she was creating high quality, organic, durable baby clothes, and then realized that not many people could afford them, not enough people, and they're only used for a short amount of time before they're no longer useful because the baby has grown out of them. So that for me, it screams out like this business model for a shift to a service, to offering a service rather than selling a product. The third one, the kind of curveball one, was cutlery. Again, thank you to the respondent on this. I really liked it. Yeah, it's not an innovative business model or anything like that, but there's something kind of nice about the monomaterial approach, and I think that's something that more people are thinking about when they think about design for a circular economy. Is if you can use a smaller variety of materials, it makes reprocessing those easier at the end of use. Now, I can't comment on the recycling rates for cutlery, but certainly on that material selection angle, that could be an inspiration. The Adidas Futurecraft Loop is a good example as well of a product where they've decided to use one type of material rather than the many that are usually in trainers. The last two that I'll select is around, they're kind of much bigger things, both agricultural examples, but quite different. So Common Land was submitted as, again, new to me. This was the great thing about this whole process, was learning some stuff. Common Land is a great example of regenerative agriculture. And again, this comes down to decisions. Yeah, not necessarily do I glue two materials together or screw them together, but thinking about the flows of materials at an agricultural scale. Are those materials being let go? Are they being lost and wasted? Or are there decisions that we can make to bring them back onto farmland, to feed them back into natural systems? Can we decide to reduce the use of pesticides and fertilizers to create better quality food products and to rebuild the capital of the soil? So agriculture is another area where design decisions are really important. And then 3,000 acres was a good one. I can't remember the city. I think it was in Melbourne, where they mapped the roughly 900 olive trees that were growing naturally in the city, enabled local people to find them using a virtual kind of tree mapping platform, and to harvest the olives that were just being wasted, that were just falling to the ground. I love this example as a way to tap into the kind of natural flows of organic materials that are happening all around us all the time. And in something like a city, that material would typically be wasted, or could even be a waste problem that someone's paid to clear up. In this way, they were producing local olive oil, which I thought was super cool and made me a bit hungry.
So someone's asked, Joe,
yeah,
would I be right in thinking that almost everything designed before the 20th century was circular?
Yeah, that's the question I wanted to pick up as well.
There's something,
surely not.
Surely not. There's also something about this notion that sometimes we can get trapped into thinking, I think, that it's all about slowing down or doing less or having less. Or why do people need to have disposable, like coffee cups to drink coffee while they're moving? Because, we just need to tone down our expectations. And it feels like when we start talking like that, we're not being very aspirational as designers, if we embrace our role as designers. And also we're possibly working a bit uphill. Yeah,
and I think that's fair, Seb. And I think it's easy sometimes working in this space or investigating this topic to sort of glamorize old ways of doing things as being some kind of panacea. But actually, let's not kid ourselves. The innovation of the 20th century and 21st century so far has resulted in amazing amounts of progress. And I'm talking about things like access to medicine, accessible food. It's not all super healthy, but people have been lifted out of poverty. Hygiene. Single-use plastics are often demonized, and we can all think of instances where we need to cut down on that for sure. But in areas like medical applications where you need something to be clean and then you can see why the single-use route has been chosen. So I think some of this is about, yes, tapping into some forms of knowledge or skill sets from the past, but absolutely updating them when you need to, for a new context, for the contemporary understanding, and for the demands of life today. I think your point about the uphill battle is right. I think we need to acknowledge that some of the systems that are in place today are real, they exist, and work to change them so that they work, rather than trying to pretend that we could somehow get in a time machine.
So I'm going to play the time police now and move us on.
I thought you might.
The next part of our session, because I think a lot of people would like to hear about the red pen exercise. that they were involved with.
Yeah, of course, sure. So whilst I mentioned earlier there's no checklist for circular design, I did want to make clear that there are some entry points, and that was really our aim with the entire circular design guide, which I've referenced a couple of times. It's at circulardesignguide.com. There are real entry points that can give you a way into thinking like a circular designer and applying some of these principles. And one of those is materials. They make up everything around us, and they can be a great place to intervene in really complex systems. And asking questions about materials can expose other design considerations. And you showed this in abundance in the Red Pen activity. So just asking about materials can lead to, do I want this product to last a long time? Because that can depend on the materials you choose. And then you might say, well, do those materials have value? Do I want to retain ownership of them if I'm a manufacturer or a service provider? Or would I be sad, or would I see it as a cost if those materials were lost from my ecosystem? And then it can lead you to think about what business model you might need in place to avoid that. So materials can be a really good entry point. And there were some amazing responses on the Red Pen graphic. I hope some of you had a chance to see them. I'm just going to head over to it now, actually. Hopefully you can see it on the screen. There's some of you there, well, quite a lot of people there now. And yeah, that's kind of populating quite quickly. So I'd encourage you to keep adding your thoughts there, not really for my benefit and to give me content for a webinar, but because it can stimulate your own thinking. And some of my favorite responses, and just for those of you who are seeing this for the first time now, I just asked people to consider, to take into account some of these material considerations that you see on the right hand side for something like a toothbrush, which is almost invisible, a backpack, like a technical hiking rucksack, a building, an office building, takeaway food, and a smartphone. And some of my favorite comments and that I noticed were Veronica mentioning the mixed up materials with the backpack, saying that it's difficult to separate things like zippers and different straps and buckles for a technical product like this. So materials with mixed up compositions mean that it's not easy to reprocess those materials. The separation becomes a barrier. And those are the sorts of materials considerations that I absolutely would expect you to be noticing. I liked Julie's comment on the office building that carbon steel used in flat, rolled and long products like pipes and girders in office buildings may be displaced by graphene and next generation materials. I thought that was super cool. And again, references our conversation a minute ago, Seb, that this isn't just about looking to the past and trying to go back in time, but saying, what can we do now? What has technological progress and innovation, what new capabilities has that given us, or is it giving us on the horizon?
I liked one of the comments on the backpack, the beautiful mountain view scene, was about the the fibers piece being, this mix of technical and biological materials, the sense that in the world of textiles, there's this interesting concept that a lot of the materials actually that go into textiles, even though the products are often technical, are biological. So things like cotton, obviously.
Yes. Yeah. And that I mean, this is like your advanced level circular economy stuff, right? If we think about the butterfly diagram being those two cycles, which there are things that are biological, something like cotton, that could be repaired, maybe remanufactured, certainly reused, and almost go through those loops that you see on the technical cycle. So great stimulus for thinking. I liked Kozu's comment that, well, this kind of speaks to the point earlier, Seb. Why don't we go back in time and start using tooth powder instead of toothpaste? That way we don't need tubes and it's easier to transport. I mean, I know Lush, who were mentioned on the thread for their packaging, they're doing that already, looking at a pill, a solid dry tablet that would give you the same benefits as toothpaste, but doesn't have the same the packaging demands, easier to transport and so on. So I thought that was pretty astute. And then two other comments that I really liked were from Carmen, who comments on the building. In some cases, there's a direct link between contract length and the durability of the build. So straight into business model, or certainly exploring the how business model links to material selection, because this was a material selection exercise, right? But we're straight into business model. And then Camilla said on the food, the takeout, one of the things I just still don't fully understand when I'm using more sustainable packaging options like biodegradable plastics is actually how they're disposed of. How are we designing better products but not putting in the systems needed to actually reuse the materials? Again, this is really just pushing on the door that this is all connected. It's not just about learning one technique or one strategy, but trying to build up an understanding or knowledge of the wider system. So again, coming back to that idea of strategy and mindset, I think both are super important.
Just to help, well, just to add to that, I guess, or use a question here to prompt you even further on that from Jessica, was asked quite early on. She asked, as Joe speaks, can you clarify that CE products means products that have a loop for resource use, not just a reusable item, and that the disposal recycling of these items is what's key to a CE stream? Because she's reflecting on some of the examples in the Monday question, and it feels like in some ways it's all of the above.
Yeah, I mean, it's for sure. And I think that was the hope with looking at something like the biological examples from the case studies, that absolutely this is about making sure that products and materials stay in a loop. And what do we, when I think about a loop, what do I mean by that? I mean that they don't cause waste and pollution, that they are kept in use for longer, or that they feed into a natural system, they regenerate a natural system. So again, always coming back to those three principles for me. But yeah, very, very, very important observation.
I think a feature on RedPen, by the way, for all of our audience is that as well as adding your own comments, you can also have conversations with people about their comments. I was seeing a few people chipping in with comments in reply to what other people are posting. It's a great place to sort of carry on the conversation and to stimulate further conversations.
Yes, as well as keep bringing your questions, because there were so many questions during this webinar and we obviously only picked up a very few ones, but you can continue posting them in the general and week 2 Slack channels on Slack and continue having the conversation among yourselves. There's a great richness of experience and knowledge there among you as well.
I just wanted to flag that this was just a kind of very simplified version of a resource we have on the Circular Design Guide called Smart Materials Choices. You can find it here in the methods section, and it has a few simple steps and then a worksheet, which is a bit more advanced than the questions that I shared on that RedPen. But you could take a product, think about the materials, and then run through this flow diagram to think in more depth about the pathway for those different materials and the different options that might be available.
Okay, Joe, so you have 3 minutes to explain their homework.
Okay, perfect.
One of the tasks for their homework.
Yeah, so for the homework, I really wanted to encourage you to go, now that you kind of dived into thinking about materials, but then are nudging up against the limitations of that, to think about the wider product. And this is really a good start around that zooming in and zooming out skill that I mentioned earlier. For your homework, I'd love you to take a look at this exercise on the Circular Design Guide. It's called Product Journey Mapping. And it really, I love the way we described it on here. Basically, pretend you're a 5-year-old. We want you to think about a product, or you could think about a type of material if that's more related to what you want to achieve from linear to circular, and ask what happens next, and keep asking what happens next to kind of blow up the system and identify opportunities for creating those loops, for creating those cycles. I'll run through a super quick example if you'll give me time, Ilma. If you think about a house, and I'm not an architect, I'm not in construction, but I know that you probably need some materials that you build, you produce some pollution and waste along the way. Ultimately, that building at some point is going to be demolished in a pretty brutal way. More pollution, mounds of rubble, some empty space. But then during the lifespan of that house as well, people are going to live there. They need energy and water. They have some consumable goods like washing machines and fridges. They also need to be manufactured. We maintain our houses. Well, I'm not as up to speed on that as I should be, but I know Seb's a bit of a DIY expert. We produce waste in the lifespan of that building as well. That often ends up going to landfill. Some of it cycles, hopefully, we hope, fingers crossed, as you fill up the recycling bin. And then we chuck out the things like Henry the Hoover as well that we saw at the start. Those end up in a landfill or on the street from around the corner from my house. So that's a linear system. I've just kind of expanded it, not even knowing too much about the construction industry. So you can then start thinking, well, how would that look if you tried to make it more circular? Well, I might use renewable energy or harvest rainwater. I might feed some energy back to the grid if I could generate too much in a way. And then instead of demolishing it, what if I dismantled it, got some really high quality materials back, fed them back in to create a new building, trying to cut down on some waste and pollution? What if the white goods and resources I needed didn't come from factories in the traditional sense, but could be made locally? Maybe they're shared with other people, offered from a service provider, that product to service model. And what if the materials that I chucked out, we could valorize them in some way? Maybe the organic matter was looped and went back to a local farm and could regenerate the soil there. And then the other stuff I chuck out, the hoovers, the washing machines, the furniture, instead of that being scrapped, what if it could be repaired, maybe locally or centrally, and then go to someone else who could maybe benefit from it, keeping those products in use for longer? So this is my very, very quick example. I'd love to see you apply your own imagination and creativity and what you know about circular economy so far to think about a linear system for a product or a material, and to scope out the opportunities for creating those cycles and those feedback loops.
Thank you, Joe. And so just to reiterate, the first task of your homework between this webinar and the webinar next week is to pick a product and create a system map for that product, and then take a photo or a snapshot of that system and put it on Slack channel, week 2 Slack channel, accompanied with one brief insight or inspiration that you got from doing this exercise. And you'll receive this homework in the week 2 channel as well. Actually, it may already be there. And it should also include the link to the journey mapping worksheet from the circular design guide that you saw Joe share with you. So that's task number 1. Task number 2 is to go back to your learning trios and spend 20-30 minutes reflecting on that. And you will receive the questions, guiding questions on the Slack channel as well.
Cool. So DIY tips, guys, just DM me directly on Slack. Actually, a couple of weekends ago, I ripped a greenhouse apart with my bare hands. So if you want to hear that story.
You are going to regret that, Seb. You are going to regret that offer.
You know, I think what I'm super energized by is the number of people posting in the chat and the Q&A and saying, well, what about this aspect of Loop? What about, you know, challenging it, really thinking more deeply about it? And I really encourage you to continue to do that in the community spaces. It's okay to share differing perspectives and to actively use that as a place to debate. I've had a couple of great conversations myself in those channels. So let's embrace that opportunity to engage people with different perspectives and to question everything while we have these weeks together. Just to reiterate, do think when you're posting in a Slack channel, is this the right place for this particular piece of content? The house rules are posted as a PDF in a few of the channels: the Get Info channel, the Homework channel, and the recorded session channels. All definitely ones to join. Join channels by clicking the little plus icon next to where it says channels, and then you can search the list. And just to let everyone know that we are aware there is a slight challenge with registering for some of those Zoom webinars in a couple of weeks' time. We are working on the tech side to resolve that. But thank you so much, Joe, for tuning in. What are the three big things you'd want people to take away from the time you've spent with us?
Wow. I think the more people are involved in circular design than you might imagine, and so in effect, anyone can do it. A great way to get started is to practice that zooming in and zooming out, thinking about users in a wider system. and then to use the Circular Design Guide as a great starting point. That was the whole point behind the design guide, was to make this a starting point for anyone that wants to get to grips with some of those strategies that are important for creating for a circular economy.
Thank you, Joe. And we will post the Circular Design Guide link and also the link to the learning path on our Learning Hub about design that features a lot of definitions for the concepts that Joe was talking about. So you can go back and read it through on the Slack channel for week 2. And next week, the webinar will be on Wednesday, 29th of April, at the same time, wherever you are. And we will be talking about circular economy business models. And that's it from us today. Thank you, Joe. It's been great to be with you and co-hosting Seb. And we'll see you on our communities, LinkedIn and Slack. Have a great week, everyone. And happy Earth's Day.